it's interesting that how the Lord kind of gives out the inheritance, and it's like in a just way, that we have to understand. It's like each one given his portion based on his size, and the justice of that everyone's inheritance was adequate. Because that would have been an argument: who was going to go where? I want that. So the idea then that the land itself was given by a lot, but basically chosen by God. Because I imagine some land, like always, some land's better than others. So everyone had the opportunity of that same equal opportunity. So, and that just shows you God's wisdom. That's just so neat how what they did inherit was adequate for their size and their needs. And the land that they were actually given was chosen by God, basically, where he placed them, and then it would be theirs as a possession forever, and one day I think that possession will be restored, and we know that the possession of this land is much larger than what modern day political Israel is. It's going to encompass many other, an expanded boundary. Let's put it that way. A very expanded boundary. And, and I imagine in the millennial reign, when Christ does return, it'll be the same thing. He will be coming to restore the land, and he will be handing out the inheritance again, and having his people occupy the land as he sees fit. But this is real interesting about the daughters, and I think right here is such a good example of how God cares for women, that different than any other religion. Like Muslim religion some women don't have the same rights in many other cultures, but here we're seeing in ancient culture of Hebrew how the women were regarded as an equal, that their inheritance was equal to to represent the family like that. And it's interesting that this subject had to be brought up, that these 5 daughters had to ask.
They wanted their inheritance.
Yeah, they had to ask for their inheritance, And they're like, well, we haven't dealt with this yet. And God goes to, Moses goes to the Lord like he should. And, was like, you're right. They are right. They do deserve an inheritance. And especially because what their argument was is our dad was faithful to God. He wasn't one of these that rebelled against him, even though he died in the wilderness. He deserved an inheritance as well. And they then, just like all these other men, their inheritance is based on their birthright, and then also the size and the portion that adequate. It's inadequate. So that's just really interesting that it really goes into that. And I think this is like one of the early things we have here, maybe in history, about women's rights. It's like, it's pretty interesting.
Something I just thought about with that story is, on one hand, the daughters come to Moses, and even though property was normally handed down patrilineally, and with kind of a sort of primogeniture thing where the firstborn gets a double portion, the rule that God gives is that if he has no sons, then his inheritance goes to his daughters. And if he has no daughters, then, it goes out to his extended family, but it's supposed to stay in the clan. But this could also be, well, for one thing, it tells us that even though Zelophehad died in his sins, he didn't lose the covenant. He was never cut off from the covenant. He was part of that generation that God said, because you were faithless, you're going to die in the wilderness. But you don't lose your inheritance. You remain Israel. Well, even if it was, he still remains Israel. And I think this is prophetic of Israel in exile later. Israel was kicked out of the land and sent out into the wilderness, metaphorically, Assyria and Babylon and all places beyond. And they didn't cease being Israel because God promised them, he said, I'm kicking you out, but I'm going to bring your descendants back again. So in order for that to be true, they have to be the children of the same people who were kicked out, which means that Israel, no matter what their sins, remains God's chosen people. They can't be cut off from the covenant. God just doesn't do that. They can be cut off from, one person can be cut off from his inheritance, as in he can be removed from it, but the inheritance is still his, and his children will inherit it. So it'll skip generations, but it can't be permanently removed from a descendant of Jacob. And another thing that just occurred to me was that, God counts nations patrilineal. Like, you are part of your father's clan, not your mother's clan. And when a woman gets married, she joins her father's people. Her husband's people, sorry. And it even says that, if she's widowed or divorced or something, then if she doesn't have children, then she goes back to her father's house and waits for either, her husband's brother to marry her, or, whatever the circumstance is going to be for that particular woman. But she returns to her father's clan if she doesn't have any children. If she has children, she stays with her father-in-law's clan instead. Since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the Jews have counted Jewishness by the mother instead of the father, which is exactly the opposite of how God intended it. But here we have a case of the son either not being born or being lost, and God counting their membership in the tribe through the women instead of the men. So, God counts adoption as a legitimate thing, because we see people like Caleb and other people who are adopted, and we're adopted into Israel. So, I don't know, it seems like this might be prophetic of the idea that even though God normally counts membership in the nation of Israel through fathers, when the fathers are lost, he counts them through the mothers, like prophetic of recognizing the Jewish way of counting Jewishness. And I think that also depends on actually being faithful. Like, are you really believing in the God of Abraham, or is this just a ritual conversion thing? I think that's it. I don't think that necessarily clears up all possible confusion about who is and who isn't a Jew, but it's enough of a prophetic picture, maybe, for at least me to say, I don't know. And even though those people aren't through their fathers, a lot of them are not descended from Jacob. That's God's business, not mine. And if he decides that they are Jews, then we'll figure that out when the Messiah comes back. And in the meantime, the people who are called by the name, if they're faithful, they're faithful.
Well, yeah. I think it's interesting too, because we talk about being grafted into Israel, so we're Israel. But one of the things that I think is so interesting about these daughters approaching Moses is, one, that they had the faith to approach him and the courage to approach him and say, we want what is rightfully our father's. Like, we want him to have an inheritance, and so that his name won't be erased. Like, we want this. So it wasn't like it's about us. Like, we want our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like that sort of thing. Like, they certainly wanted what was rightfully theirs, but it wasn't this, I want to take this stuff and go do what I want with it. They were saying, we want to be counted as Israel. That's what they were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most important thing about this, is that they weren't saying, give us our land so we can go do our own thing and be our own people. They were like, we just want to be part of Israel. And I think with what you're saying, there's a very common possibility, is that those who really want to be part of Israel, God's the one who knows their heart. Like, God knows what's going on. And I think that's what stands out to me, is just this wasn't like, we want this for ourselves to just do whatever we want with it. This wasn't this God owes us something. It was, we want to be part of this. How do we continue to be part of this?
Kind of reminds me of Jacob and Esau. Jacob valued the inheritance.
Yes.
Esau sold it for beans. And so it's just that idea of this is an exercise in valuing that inheritance for the inheritance sake. And then when you look at Tim Haig's commentary, kind of brought up this idea of like, why are we even calling it an inheritance? Because it's not being passed down, from like it's being handed to them by the owner of all things, the one that owns the land. Because when you think about the idea of like, who owns the land? Like, who's the original person? Like, well, God.
Yeah.
God owns it, and he's calling it an inheritance, and it's being passed on to Israel. And why? Is it because Israel's so awesome? Or is it because, and I think you referenced Ezekiel 36, and it's the idea that I'm doing this to fulfill my promises. It's not because of you. So as soon as you start getting all like arrogant, it's because my name is holy, and I have made a promise from Abraham on that this is what's going to take place, and it will take place. And I am the giver of this, regardless of your shenanigans, which they continue to participate in. But at the same time, you see blessings, tied to it, and it is referenced in here when we see Nadab and Abihu brought up, and these sins are brought forth again and not to be forgotten. But at the same time, it's God's holiness and God's promises that are being carried forward, regardless of what Israel is doing.
Because he's true, because he's faithful.
When this shows just the fact that they ask for this and they want to be a part of it, shows their faith that the promised land will be conquered.
Yeah.
They're like, so in a lot of ways they were just like Joshua, like you said. It's like, they want to be a part of this. They have everything to believe that God's going to do what he said he's going to do, and they're going to conquer this promised land, and they want to make sure they're a part
Because
of
God's doing.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
And Moses could have made the decision like quick. He didn't. He was like, I'm going to seek the God for the, to find out like about this issue. You would have thought like, y'all are just some girls, you know what I mean?
Well, culturally, that could have been true.
But it shows that he really did, like you said, value what these women, they do, they should have some kind of right. So I thought that was kind of cool too. I never really read that before to see all that. But yeah, for Moses, someone who had the authority to basically make a quick decision, didn't, and went to God for something that most would think probably was kind of.
Yeah, and it shows us who God was, and he's our intercessor. I mean, Moses is our intercessor to God with Israel right now, and Moses is giving us a good example as a leader. He's obviously, I haven't dealt with this before. I needed to go to God and get some prayer, and now we have precedent.
Yeah.
Now we have legal precedent.
Yeah. Enough where it actually just says this is a commandment. You know what I mean? Like add this in.
Yeah. It's like we just add this to our book of laws.
Yeah.
So now we have a precedent, and women have rights to their inheritance, and these ladies showed their faith by asking for it.
Yeah.
And knowing that that God's gonna do his.
And it shows that commandments evolve according to situations at hand. You know what I mean? Like this is a command for this situation that you're dealing with. There wasn't a command prior to this.
Right. So that's good. Yeah. So again, if anyone thinks that like Hebrew or Christian faith, that women don't have rights or lesser, they don't know what they're talking about. It's like, no, that's other religions. This is freedom.
Just like everything else in God's kingdom, it's like everything's kind of upside down from the way the world tends to see things. And in the cultures around in the world at the time, women were like not elevated. And I think even going back to things like honor and shame based culture, which the Hebrew culture was one like that, and many of the older traditional cultures were like that. It's like God has this system and this hierarchy and this way of inheritance and all this other stuff, and things had tended to be passed along through men, and men had authority over their wives and their daughters and all this stuff. And of course, we know the world totally misunderstands like submission and what that really is about, and all these different things. That's just another way to show like how God's intention for women is to elevate them. I mean, even in the situation with Adam and Eve, it's like God's intention was to restore everything. So even though, let's say, Eve was the one who first made the wrong move, it's like God's intention was always to restore her. And Adam bore the responsibility in that case. So there's a lot of ways in which I think we don't understand culturally how women are elevated and given positions of honor. And a lot of times we assume or like to think that it's by giving them more rights or more freedoms or more of something that is how we elevate them. But in this case, these women were elevated because of their faith. They were honored because they trusted God. And because God is faithful, because he's who he says he's going to be. So it wasn't it wasn't like he changed everything about their lives in the sense that, it wasn't oh, now you have a right to vote or, some other, thing that we think about with women's rights. But their names are in this book. And if this hadn't happened, their names would not be in this book. We wouldn't know who they are. We wouldn't know what happened. And I think that's an indication of how he does want women to have a position of honor, but it doesn't put them in a position outside of their role and the ranks of what he has for us, which are just two different things. And I think that's really ultimately what I'm trying to say is it's just two different things to have a rank, and a role, and then
well, it doesn't change the position of authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't change any of that. What it does do is give them, again, it's a part of still within God's plan for the land to be carried forth.
Yeah.
And they wanted to participate in that, but they weren't trying to usurp anyone's authority.
Exactly.
Or change.
They weren't trying to change how things were. They weren't rebelling against the order. And I think that's so important because I do feel like the world has a way of looking at that and saying, this is how women get rights. They rebel against, right? And in this case, they're how do we work within Israel and be part of Israel and get what is really rightfully ours that God promised, which is a whole different thing because that's saying, I want to be part of this. I don't want to rebel against it. I want to see how we can actually have what we're supposed to have. And I think that's powerful. And it's just unfortunate that if we don't seek to look at the whole picture and say, how does this fit? Then we would miss it and say, oh, this is women getting
there. We could preach a whole sermon on women's rights and stuff up by it.
Yeah, this is women getting their due, and it's they are, but it's within the context of not rebelling against God. It's within the context of saying, how do you want us to be honored, God? And how do you want to be glorified in this? And I think that's a very different approach. The heart of these women is very different. So I just wanted to state that I think it's just so different than what we would think of as modern women's rights, right? Especially in terms of feminism. But let me not go into too much of that because I might get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to feminism.
Yeah, I know you weren't. I know you weren't. I just think it's so easy to I think for people to misunderstand.
Well, or for some people who have a better understanding of God than he doesn't care.
Right.
You
right.
know?
There are a lot of people in the modern church that.
Yeah, and that's just not at all. I mean, and it's and women are also created in the character of God, and even in there, I forgot. I think it's a psalm where God compares himself as a mother hen gathering his chicks. And even he's all right to associate with a feminine idea.
Right.
And it's and yeah, so it's just a misunderstanding of Scripture to not think that women don't have those rights or those cared for and stuff like that. And the same thing when Christ was defending the woman that they brought up to be stoned. He was defending her. He cared enough for her that he saw that they were unjustly accusing her without witnesses. Yeah. And so I mean, obviously, and we see in multiple times how Christ goes to the women. At the well constantly.
Exactly.
That's where you go to meet women. It's at the well.